The parable of the rich fool in Luke 12, I think is a nice associative reading with Ecclesiastes. In terms of living unconsciously of the reality of the dark clouds, we can inoculate ourselves as best as we can from the reality of Hevel Hevelim. And here we have this unreflective rich man, not someone in pursuit of wisdom, not really interested in hearing what Kohelet has to say, could only see the surplus of his goods and his wealth. His emotional and his thinking activities were singly devoted to maintaining and preserving his wealth. But here's the reality for everyone. The Lord provided for the rich man an Ecclesiastes moment. Namely, you are going to die, and when you die, you will take none of these good things with you. And so for the rich fool, this was a moment of revealed wisdom that brought with it, according to the parable, much grief and much sorrow. So Hevel, smoke, breath, wind, even in the good things of our existence, the pursuit of wisdom. It's a good thing to pursue wisdom, but it has its limitations. It's a good thing to pursue our toil and our labors, but it's not ultimately satisfying. And while pleasures are a kindness in this world, they can never suspend or sustain us through the reality of the fact that they are all fleeting and ungraspable. That's the dark cloud. Well, where does Kohelet take us with all of this? I don't think Kohelet leaves us in despair. This is the hug of the book. He leaves us with, I think, this is my taxonomy on this, but three monumental and life-altering truths. These are truths that are fit only for those who believe in God as the creator of heaven and earth. Number one, he leaves us with Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Will someone mind reading those first 8 verses? And if you want me to hum a Beatles tune in the background, I can. Anybody willing to read those? Yes, ma'am.
For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, and a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, and a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to cast away, a time to tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Ecclesiastes 3 is a tour de force of God's providence. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. God is ordering time, governing his own purposes. That does not in any way remove the sting of Hevel. Our finitude and the limitations of our human capacity to grab hold of life forces the faithful to refocus with some frequency. I would love to say, we together on this weekend had this kind of nice time with Ecclesiastes and Kohelet, and now we've got it sorted out. We're fixed. You're fixed now. Go and be. It doesn't work that way. We'll have to come to terms with this again and again. And in that sense, Kohelet is kind to its readers. No pie in the sky, no escapism. And yet, he leaves us with a claim about God's providential ordering of time toward his own purposes and toward his own end. The truth of the matter is, a doctrine of divine providence is both terrifying and comforting at the same time. I wish there weren't the terrifying aspect of it. It's like these young Christians who discover God's sovereignty, and all of a sudden now they've got this massive view of God and his sovereignty and his determinative purposes in the world, and then in time it sort of settles on them like God's sovereignty doesn't mean you get to escape the train that's heading at you. That's the old Calvinist joke, right? The Arminian, when the Wesleyan falls down the stairs, he says, "Well, I got to watch my step." When the Calvinist falls down the stairs, he says, "What? I'm glad that's over with." It's bad. It's a bad determinist joke. And in other words, we don't get to escape. But God, according to a theology of creation, operates from the seventh day of his existence. He's overseeing creation toward its own redemptive end and seeing to his purposes for us. This is a mystery. That's the terrifying part. There's a mystery to the character of this. This is where we recognize, for example, with William Cooper, and God moves in mysterious ways his wonders to perform, that God is his own best interpreter. So the comfort of divine providence is we leave our times and our seasons in the hands of God, knowing that does not get you a get-out-of-jail-free card from Hevel Hevelim. But the comfort of that is knowing he is the one directing these things toward his own redemptive purposes. Hevel Hevelim is not the end of the story. We're being moved and we're being drawn into, for the future, the seventh day of God's being. There is a rest, Hebrews tells us in chapter 4, that remains for the people of God. Jesus is our Shabbat. We will live into the fullness of Shabbat in eternity, knowing true rest, true comfort. And God is ordering time toward that end. That is our only hope and comfort in life and death, that we are not our own. If I can quote the Heidelberg Catechism. We're not our own. We've been claimed by another. And he's ordering the events of our lives toward his own redemptive purposes. And that does not mean that you and I will figure out the algorithms and the complexities of our lives. This is where Job comes onto the scene and offers us a really hard and yet hopeful illustration of this. I was just talking about this with a group of folks last week. You do know this, right? That you as a reader of Job have an omniscient view on that story in a way that Job never had. He never got it. That is hard. All right, you have the heroic Job in the first two chapters. Naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I will return. And then you get into more complicated Job, chapter 3 and following, and this sort of back and forth discussion with the representatives of human wisdom, Bildad, Zophar, Eliphaz, right, who are offering wisdom in an unwise way, right? Claiming more for themselves and their knowledge of the circumstance than they should. They have to be atoned for by the end of the book. And then Job, who's asking all throughout the book for his courtroom moment with God, so that he can then present his case before the living God and say, you made a mistake on this one, right? I didn't do anything to deserve what I've got. Let me argue my case. And he gets what he asks for. It's remarkable. Job gets his courtroom moment with God. And all of these questions, this is the humor of the book, right? All these questions that Job wants to raise in that courtroom setting, he never says a word. Not a word. Put my hand over my mouth. I didn't know who you were. I don't know who you were. Where were you, Job, when I laid the foundations of the world? You've heard about Leviathan and Behemoth? I don't know what those are. Dragons, Megalodon, the kind of thing that if you saw swimming in the ocean, you just died if you saw it, right? So you see Megalodon, Leviathan, Behemoth? I play catch with them. I play games in the backyard with them. And here Job sees his own reality over against the grandiose character of the living God. And it brings God into perspective, and it causes Job to move into silence. And yet, Job never knows the story. He never has the answer to the cause that led to his suffering. Not that it would have helped, right? Oh, by the way, Job, the Satan, the accuser, came into my courtroom, and I don't want to tell you this part, Job, but I brought you up to him. He didn't bring you up. I brought you up to him. And he said, well, of course, Job praises you all the time. He's a righteous man because everything he touches turns to gold. Just, let's start messing with him a little bit. And I said, okay. Like, would that have helped Job? It doesn't help me. So it's not like the answer would have helped, but Job never gets the answer to that. What Job gets, in the language of Eleanor Stump, is second-person address from the living God. He speaks, makes his presence known. You've got me, Job. What do I have in heaven or earth besides me? This is the hardness, I think, of what we deal with in the reality of human suffering and its loss. We are left in the hands of God's providence, and that brings with it both terror and comfort. I don't want to attenuate that. I don't want to relieve the tension of that. But the comfort is knowing the kind hands that we are in. Where do we find comfort from the terror of the living God? And that self-same God, in his mercy and his kindness. So we see that the limitations of human wisdom and the fact that we are left in the hands of God's providence, trusting that he is ordering us toward our own end in our own time. That's number one. Number two, a lot to talk about with providence, by the way, but number two. Kohelet moves us away from despair over the pursuit of, this is going to be a bit of a shocker if you haven't spent time in this book in a while, over despair over the pursuit of wisdom, pleasure, and toil. Right? So, hey, wisdom, pleasure, toil, hevel, hevelim. Okay, I've let you know that. That's true. Well, here's comforting word number two. I'd like to give you back wisdom, pleasure, and toil. He gives us back the things that he problematizes for us in the first two chapters. Look at Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 24. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. Oh boy, here's a verse worth reflecting on. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have real enjoyment? Look at chapter 5, which I think is a kind of seam chapter in the book. Verses 18 through 20. Behold, what I've seen to be good and fitting. Well, what's good and fitting in light of Hevel, Hevelim? To eat and drink. To find some enjoyment in all the toil which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Everyone whom God has given wealth and some possessions, some power, enjoy them. Accept his lot, rejoice in his toil. This is the gift of God. For he will not remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. So that's I found that to be a stunner, frankly, reading the book. Because you can despair when you recognize that toil, my hard work in life, the pursuit of wisdom and pleasure cannot offer me the ultimate satisfaction that I'm after. They just can't do it because they're hevel. But in light of that truth, right? In light of that, now let me tell you, enjoy the bottle of wine. Go to the park and hope for the walk-off home run in the ninth. It's a great experience. And enjoy your work. Give yourself to it and pursue excellence with it. Read and study and know, recognizing that none of that can offer you ultimately what you need for your human fulfillment. But in light of that, that's why I love that verse in chapter 2, in light of Him, true enjoyment can be found. Now this is where sort of St. Augustine comes into the scene for me here. Because it seems to me that Kohelet is very Augustinian, or maybe I should say Augustine is very Koheletian. I don't know if that's even a term, I just made that up. Well, what's the idea? The idea is so much of our Christian existence, what it means to pursue the faith that God has given us, is the constant attention to the proper ordering of our desires. Boy, I'm such a believer in this. This is where Martin Luther's got his things in me. Repentance is not a one-time act for the believer. The Christian life is a life of repentance. We are turning again to the truth of the gospel again and again and again. It's not a one-time, once and for all. We are turning to it again and again, holding on to those promises. We'll talk about that in the sermon tomorrow. We're holding on to the promises of God. And we turn to Him, recognizing, right, that our pleasure and our toil and our wisdom is from Him alone. Because our tendency, my tendency, is to take these good things that God has given us. This is the challenge, I think, Ecclesiastes. This is my reading in between the gaps here. To take the good things that God has given us in this world and to make them ultimate. And we will do it with the silliest of things. The good things we will do it with. My 9-year-old but I'm speaking abstractly here, isn't getting enough playing time on the soccer team. Send me into despair. My colleague got the promotion and I didn't. It's remarkable the crevices in our hearts where our flesh can take over and let penultimate things become ultimate. But Calvin famously said that our hearts are idol factories. If we're left on religious autopilot, we will take anything that we can and make it a god. This is why the first commandment is not just one among 10. It's the foundation upon which the whole edifice is built. No other gods but me. That's why Luther famously said in his larger catechism, the definition of an idol and God is the same thing. What do you put your faith and your trust and your hope in? They're both the same thing. So my tendency is to take these good things and to make them ultimate. And I think so much of the dynamic of the Christian life is living into the gift of repentance to work through that dynamic. God, I've done it again. And I feel all the disorder that comes along with that. I've taken a gift that you've given me, and I've a creature, and I've turned it into the Creator again. I've done it again, Lord. Would you reorder my desires once again toward you? Recognizing that all those good things that you've given me in this world are gifts that draw me ultimately to you. They're not cul-de-sacs. We want them to be. They're off-ramps on the highway to something even more, namely God. So the ordering of our desires is so crucial, and this is where I think Kohelet says, when you enjoy that bottle of wine with friends on the front porch, or you have that human experience that's so rich and full, or it's just a normal day and it's a good day, all of that is a whisper of something transcendent, of something more. It's not the ultimate more. He is the ultimate more. Our heavenly destination, the new heavens and the new earth, that's our ultimate more. But He gives us these good gifts in this world that are like echoes from beyond, inviting you into something else. It's one of the reasons why I'm married an artist, and I'm a bit, if I was left to myself, I know I'd be a Philistine. I know I would be. But I married an artist. I'm so grateful. Because, been in an art gallery before? All right? forced my poor kids, all 4 of them, to go to the Cezanne exhibit in Chicago this summer. Largest collection of Cezanne paintings that I think America's had in a long time. And Cezanne's my favorite. I love it. But too many paintings. Like, I don't know if you're like me, but I just need 6. Like after a while, like, John Singer, there's another John Singer Sargent, whatever. I can't take it all in. But what is it about these paintings? What is it about a paint? It almost whispers to you from somewhere other. It's an invitation to the transcendent. These experiences of goodness that God gives us in this life of ours, we are to embrace them, to give thanks for them, and to recognize that they're not ends unto themselves. They whisper to us of the more, of the transcendent, that we are offered completely in Christ and are waiting for the fulfillment of in the new heavens and the new earth. Thirdly, Kohelet brings God into central focus, leaves us with providence, gives us the good gifts of this world, and then he leaves us with God. Look at Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 7. Can we just read a little bit of this? For when dreams increase and words grow many, there is Hevel. But God is the one that you must fear, for that seizes on us. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. He has made everything beautiful in its time. It's a claim of providence. He's put eternity into man's heart so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Verse 1, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, and the years draw near of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain. Ecclesiastes 11 and 12 is a master's course in our finitude. Look at chapter 11 while we're here. Cast your bread upon the waters. Do acts of kindness, I think is one way of reading this. For many days you will find it later. Give portion to 7 to 8. You don't know what disaster may happen on the earth. Clouds are full of rain, empty themselves of the earth. If the tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. You can't control the events of this world. He observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. Verse 8, so if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all, but let him also remember that the day of darkness will be many, and that everything is ultimately Hevel. So rejoice, you young people. I see young people are here. Rejoice in your youth. Let your heart cheer you. In the days of your youth, walk in the ways of your heart, in the sight of your eyes. But remember, you're going to meet God someday. Remove vexation from your heart. Put away pain from your body. For youth and the dawn of life are all vanity. And then verse 12, chapter 12, remember the creators in the days of your youth. Let's sit with this for a second. Verse 3, in the days when the keeper of the house trembled and the strong men are bent and the grinders cease, my teeth aren't working anymore because they're few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed, and the doors of the street are shut, the sound of the grinding is low. One rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high. They grow more fearful as they age. Terrors are in the way. The almond tree blossoms. The grasshopper drags itself along. Desires begin to fail. It's interesting to compare and contrast Song of Solomon and Ecclesiastes 12 in terms of desire and virility. Desire is now failing. Man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Before, and here are these incredible images, before the silver cord that holds up the golden bowl of your life snaps and the bowl falls and it's shattered and broken, or the pitcher that's shattered at the fountain, or the wheel that's broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to the God who gave it. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher, it's all vanity. Hevel Hevelim. I mean, you blink and you're in old age. You blink and your teeth aren't working right anymore. You blink and the silver cord that held up the bowl of your existence has snapped and it's shattered on the ground, and your body goes to the dust and your spirit returns to the God who gave it. You are fleeting, your Hevel. Oh, it's beautifully heavy. And then look at the last verses. Boy, these are so rich. Well, here's the end of everything. You've heard it all, and we might say we've heard enough. Right? Fear God. Keep His commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. This is why you are. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether it's good or whether it's evil. These are the opening lines of St. Augustine's Confessions. First two paragraphs from the New Translation by Sarah Rudin. I commend that translation to you, by the way. You are might, Master, and to be praised with a powerful voice. Great is your goodness, and of your wisdom there can be no reckoning. Yet to praise you is the desire of a human being who is some part of what you have created. I love this translation. A human hauling his deathliness in a circle. What an image. Hauling us in a circle the evidence of his sin, the evidence that you stand against the arrogant, but still immortal, a given portion of your creation longs to extol you. We've been made for praise. We've been made to find the effervescence of our being in God Himself. That's why we were made. In yourself you rouse us, giving us delight and joy in glorifying you, because you made us with yourself as our goal, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. That's where I think Kohelet and St. Augustine, I believe, are hanging out a lot in heaven. They're like, boy, we share a lot of the same ideas. At the end of the matter, when you take into account Hevel Hevelim, when you take into account that you cannot stop the aging of the body, when you take into account that you cannot stop the silver cord from being broken that's holding up the picture of your existence, when you take all of that into account, what are you left with? And Kohelet leaves you with the greatest thing that we could be left with, namely God Himself. Gregory of Nazianzus, 4th century Cappadocian, wrote this incredible poem. Do a Google search on this, called "Where Are You, Christ?" This kind of thing you'd think someone would have written yesterday. And he goes and he starts to compare his own life to the fallenness of the world around him, even the animal kingdom. And this is what Gregory of Nazianzus says, a bishop in the 4th century. If it were not for you, O Christ, this life would be a crime. And he says it again and again and again. But what's the implication? But we do have Christ. He's given us Himself. Psalm 73, which I think sits at the very hinge of the Psalter. I won't argue for it, I'll just tell you that. Beginning of book 3. Right there in the heart of the Psalter. Well, what is it? It's Kohelet meeting Asaph in the temple. It's Asaph saying, surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. It's Asaph, in effect, claiming the temple liturgy. You're liturgical people. It's like saying, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. I confess that to be true. Verse 2, the Hebrew people will appreciate this. Vav disjunctive. But as for me, I lost the plot. because I see the wicked and their prosperity. The word there for prosperity is their shalom. And the wicked seem to be enjoying the covenant promises that God has made to us. Up is down, down is up. In effect, what Psalm 73 is saying, if you read it intercanonically in the Psalter, in effect, what Psalm 73 is saying is, I tried Psalm 1 and it's not working out for me. Right? And then he has a new confession in verse 13 of Psalm 73. It is surely I have kept my heart pure for nothing. And then what happens? Well, similar to Job and elsewhere, there's no alleviation of the circumstances. We never get that in the Psalms, by the way, except for Thanksgiving Psalms. But we're never given an identification of circumstances getting alleviated. We get perspective realigned again and again. From disorientation to reorientation, again and again and again. But as for me, right, he says, Psalm 73, what do I have in heaven or earth besides you? You're my portion in the land of the living. God, you are enough. I believe, and maybe I'm too brooding or middle-aged or something, so you push back in the Q&A. But I believe the unsatisfactory character of our lives in whatever area is the exposed nerve for you. And that's different than me. I've got exposed nerves that reveal the fact that life hasn't quite been what I thought it might be. We all have that. Might be hard to embrace this, but if Ecclesiastes is right, and I believe that it is, those are God's kindnesses to you. Those are whispers from beyond to say, hey, I never told you that those institutions or relationships or vocational objectives or you fill in the blank, I never told you that they could be me. They can't be me. They witness to me. So you're having a hard one here, right? So that you can be drawn to me. In C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters, which I think, I've always told my students that I didn't consider myself to be a very good evangelical because I was never all that excited about C.S. Lewis, but I'm changing as I get older. Jason to help me with this a little bit. Screwtape Letters, though, oh my, that to me, like those are worth reading and rereading and rereading. There's a genius, a theological genius at work in the Screwtape Letters, where Uncle Screwtape is the demon. He's mentoring his demon nephew Wormwood. And one of the things that I love about Screwtape Letters is I think Lewis in that book, and probably elsewhere, because some of you will know him a lot better than I do, can be properly described as a theologian of pleasure. Because he's wrestling with what is pleasure? How does it play a role in what it means to live life in light of God's character and his being? Because Uncle Screwtape tells Wormwood, hey, just so you know, whenever we're dealing with real pleasure, we're on the enemy's territory. That's God's territory. That's Christ's territory. We're parasitic with pleasure. We distort it. And so he gives his nephew some inroads. Sexuality is one of them. Let's distort some sexuality stuff. That can get you off track real fast, right? But he gives even more what we consider banal options. Hey, try to trip up this young neophyte in the faith by letting him know that he takes more pleasure in telling people that he's read a book than actually reading. Is that good? That's so insightful. Woody Allen's book Match Point, I don't know if you've seen this or not, it's not one of his better ones, but there's this young, sort of lower middle class British man who's marrying into this aristocratic London family. And many of us have had this experience, right? He's around people that talk out of his league. And they have these dinner conversations, and he's there with his fiancée, and he's very bright and he's capable, but he didn't have this kind of upbringing. They're having dinner conversations and dropping bon mots, little phrases here and there, and he's like, and there's this incredible scene, nothing said, no music, nothing. He's in his bed at night, light on, with the Cambridge Companion to Dostoevsky open and reading it. I love it. Not Brothers Karamazov, not The Idiot, not The Gambler, the Cambridge Companion. Why? He didn't want to read Dostoevsky. He wants to be able to say a few smart things at the cocktail party tomorrow night. Uncle Screwtape says, got him, right? That's a parasitic pleasure. That's not real pleasure. To turn someone into a food critic. Let them be critical of every meal they eat, and then they won't really enjoy the meal they have. That's our territory. Go get them. I mean, I think this is where Kohelet is going with us. The good pleasures of this world that God gives us are God's territory when properly ordered. And how are they properly ordered? When they drive us to Him again and again and again. When it's all said and done, what's the whole duty of man? The whole duty of humanity is to fear God. Now let's talk about that, and then I'll stop. To fear God. That's a word worth doing some study on. You might be interested in this. In Psalm 19, the fear of the Lord is used as a synonym for the law of the Lord. The law of the Lord is perfect, making wise the simple. The fear of the commandments, precepts, fear of the Lord. So the fear of the Lord can be wrapped up in an understanding of a desire and a hunger for God's word, His instruction, His truth, His Torah. In Deuteronomy chapter 5 and 6, the fear of the Lord and the love of God are used almost coterminously. That's weird, because fear and love don't seem to work with one another. Yet for Deuteronomy they do. Fearing God and loving God. Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4, right? Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. I can be a little maybe naughty this morning. The Lord alone, no other. That's at the heart of the whole of biblical faith. Jesus answered that question correctly when the Pharisees asked him, what's the most important commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and your mind. And then Jesus says the second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself. The Shema's at the center. Well, what's the next verse after Deuteronomy 6:4? Verse 5. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your thinking capacity, all your mind, that which animates you internally. And again, this is my own reading on this. You can push back. I think that last thing that we translate as all your might is actually an adverb. Can I give you a clunky translation? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, very, very muchly. A lot. With all that you are. What does it mean to command someone to love? I see some married couples in here. That's never worked out well I'm 22 years married, so starting to figure it out. To command my wife to love, like snap to it, love me. Like that's just, I don't know. I'm no marriage counselor, but that doesn't work. What does it mean to command to love? Well, let's not think of love here primarily in terms of romantic categories. Think of love here in terms of ultimate loyalty and devotion. That's the command. Love me, be loyal to me, fear me, worship me, live in the reality of my mysterious, tremendous otherness. Live in the reality of the all that I inspire. Live in reality of the grace in which I've given to you. Let the whole of your being be shaped and framed by me. All of it. Fear me. Love me. Be loyal to me. I say this to my students at Beeson. I say it to myself regularly. Loyalty and devotion is the fertile soil out of which faithfulness grows. And, by the way, affection can grow. That's true, by the way, for our marriages, too. Right? I joke with people that I've been married to 5 different women, all the same one. We're just changing, right? My 24-year-old wife is not my 46-year-old wife. We're different. But the commitment to the relationship, the devotion and loyalty to that itself, that's the fertile field out of which real affection and real romance and real faithfulness can grow. Our culture gets that all twisted. Kierkegaard calls that juvenile love. We tend to idealize romance and love by the young couple that's very attractive and beautiful. I think the best of the tradition would characterize love best by the old couple sitting on the park bench. That's real love right there. Mature love. Faithfulness has grown. That's where Kohelet leaves us. In the fertile field of fearing the Lord, devoted to Him. Because that devotion to Him is where the seeds of affection and joy and faithfulness and God's gracious presence to navigate the Hevel Hevelim of our existence as we move toward our ultimate end. Jesus Christ is the great ecclesiast. He is wisdom personified. And Jesus came into this disordered Hevel Hevelim existence of our world to order it and to bring it toward its renewed creation. That's what we hope for. And it's the fear of the Lord that shapes us as we move toward that ultimate end. All right, I need to stop talking. You want to have a made you mad on anything? You want to swear or cuss or have questions? I think we have 15 minutes, right, John? Brother John.
I'll start things off. What do you think of the reading of Ecclesiastes that I'm thinking of Trimmer Longman, where he views Ecclesiastes essentially as 11 and a half chapters of wrong. And then at the very end says, see what we just read? Yeah, don't do that. What do you think of that reading?
I don't like it. Yeah, I'm aware of it. And again, this is part of the challenge of dealing with the metaphors. I think he goes down the absurdity, meaningless sort of reading of Hevel. So he kind of reads it through that, what I would call early 20th century despair literature lens. And that reading is on offer. In other words, like I understand why people go that track, and it's available. I think there are too many. Now you can go. We're going to get a little scholastic here, but you can go down a redaction critical side if you want to. I think there's an intimation of that in what Longman's doing, to see all these other seeds that are planted in there, sort of later insertions that don't make sense. But if I'm going to deal with the book canonically as a whole, there's just too many insertions in between the way. End of chapter 2, end of chapter 5, chapter 7. There's too much along the way that reorients us again and again. So I'm aware of Longman's reading. I'm just not persuaded by it. Yeah. And it seems to me to be theologically deficient too. I shouldn't say that because I like him a lot. But I think it's theologically deficient. This is a book that I think demands being read in concert with the best of the Christian tradition on the affections and desire. I think it needs to be read in concert with the best of the. This is a place where Christian dogmatics and theology and the tradition can kind of help us, I think, read a book that can go multiple ways, but I think kind of resist that. So, but I realize not everyone's persuaded by that, but I'm one that would want to see this in the tradition. Early church fathers were kind of remarkable on this. They read Kohelet as the voice of the living Christ, speaking into the brokenness of our world, drawing us into the fear of God and the pleasures that affords. So I have a lot of time for those kind of figural reading strategies. Yes, sir.
This might be getting in the weeds a little bit, but just out of curiosity, in chapter 3, is there anything to the ordering of the couplets there that Solomon's doing there? How he's, at least what we would read, kind of a good versus a bad, building up versus tearing down versus killing, and just how those seem to kind of alternate somewhat.
Yeah.
Is he doing something there intentionally, or?
Well, I I'd have to give some more thought to that, just to be honest. But I wonder if these sort of couplets are built off of this kind of idea of Homerism, because you're dealing with something about the totality of things in the fullness of what they are, war and peace. Right, so that gives you a full view. So there does seem to be some sort of poetic devices at work there. What's the intention of the structure? I have to give that some thought. John.
You were talking about screw tape letters. I think that and the dealing with pleasure in particular, the verses came to my mind from Psalm 16, the conclusion, you make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. I think a lot of Christians, maybe just the ones I've run into, that they get converted, and a kind of default setting is, I've lived for myself too much. Pleasures really, I need to renounce pleasures. And in kind of one fell swoop, the sense is that if I enjoy pleasures, that's sinful. And I love what you're saying. I'd just like you to talk about it a little more. It seems like the psalm here is so good because the center, when you come into the heart of God, kind of beatific vision, it's God himself is the center. But in his right hand are pleasures. It's sort of the pleasures beckon you into who he is.
Yeah.
Pleasures are not maybe the central heart of God, but they're the whisper that takes you inside and kisses you in such a way that you want that dear presence forever. So say a little bit more, if you will, about pleasure, because I think, are pleasures sinful or pleasures not sinful? And you're helping us think through a reconstructed view of the right place pleasure has for us. Can you say more?
Yeah, I mean, sin, and this is where the Screwtape Letters are so good, sin lurks around the neighborhood of pleasure at all times to distort it. This is what we battle with in our hearts. Of course, sexuality is the big one. We live in the world on the far side of the sexual revolution, and it's everywhere that we turn. I mean, I wish that weren't our moment, but it is. So that's sort of exhibit A of this. But this is my kind of reformational worldview. Okay, it's where the reformers kind of got their fangs into me with this sort of robust account of creation. You think about, I'm going to get in trouble here, but there can be a kind of, someone's going to send me an email on this, Lutheran reduction. I shouldn't have said that. That views creation as a mere platform for redemption. That's not the way the Bible's ordered. Genesis and Revelation become problems in that. Redemption is the instrument by which God is renewing the world according to its intended purposes, not for us to become something other than human. This is huge. But for us to really become the kind of humans God created us to be, in blissful relationship to Him and to each other. And Christians in this world recognize that the world is fallen, it needs repair, but it's not fallen in such a way that the goodness of creation doesn't still peer through it. We want it to be renewed, but in other words, the impact of sin is total. But it's not such that we don't see the goodness of creation still imprinted in the world around us. We're called, I think, to enjoy that, recognizing it needs repair. The new heavens and the new earth are physical. It's a physical existence. It's a spiritual body, animated by the Spirit, that's embodied. Now, a lot of mystery to this. And I was talking about this with these two women in the break. This is why music, and we're all adults in here, sorry, some young people, and sex are so powerful. Because music, when it's done well, and sex, it's a transcendent moment where bliss peers into time. It's a genuine moment of bliss. I heard a Roman Catholic priest, Thomas Joseph White, interviewed several years ago. It's one of the reasons why I think Song of Solomon is such an important book too. And he said, the reason why so many of the young people that I'm counseling regularly are pursuing the kind of hookup culture that they're in is not just because of sex. They are so hungry for the transcendent. They know you don't have to persuade a lot of 21-year-olds about Hevel Hevelim. Not in our world, not right now you don't. They get it. And they want to be rescued from it. And sex is we all know, right? That's a moment of suspension, of reality. that whispers to the transcendent. So, I mean, the call to pleasure rightly ordered is a call to embrace the goodness of the physical creation that God has given us in this world for His glory. And all of that witnesses to the new heavens and the new earth, which will be embodied as well. This is one of the reasons why, and again, we can debate this, and there's a lot of mystery about heaven and the new heavens and the new earth. But when Jesus says there's no marriage or giving in marriage in heaven, I mean, that's every Christian teenager's worst nightmare of what Jesus just said. You know what I mean? You're telling me that heaven is the best of human existence and sex won't be there? I'm out. I mean, how could that be, right? But I think it taps into what you're asking. It reveals the limitations of our imaginations to know that even the sex act itself is witnessing to something bliss of an order that we cannot even conceive that's awaiting us. That will make that human sexual thing be the shadow that it was. That's a shadow. Boy, but the real thing, that's where the joy is to be found. So I think that's what we're dealing with the created world and the enjoyment. I mean, you and I got to go to dinner last night with Nathan and his wife. I thought about that afterward. Around this small table and enjoying this meal and laughing and sharing stories. That's a kindness that the Lord gave us in a moment that collapsed on itself because we went our way. And yet even that moment witnesses to what eternity will be in its fullness. So I think that's the ordering that the Ecclesiastes is trying to help us have a worldview that's bigger and an understanding of God and His creative and redemptive purposes that are bigger, more transcendent, more bliss, more beauty, more goodness. Because that's all found in Him. Those transcendentals are predicates of the divine being. Everything that we enjoy, this is my kind of little slightly Platonic side coming out, but everything that we enjoy in this world is a derivative of that and invites us into it. So far from, a kind of escapist idea to get away from the body, I think the Bible's wanting us to have a full orb theology of the body because God created His world and He told us it's good. This is good.
Yeah, that's right.
Tov. Sorry. Yes, sir.
Does the passage in Ecclesiastes 6, verses 3 through 6, speak more clearly to this? It says, if a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that the day of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he has no burial, I say that a stillborn is better off than he. Is that kind of speaking to the pleasure of...
Yeah.
It's good.
It's good.
I was going to say, because if not, I'm so confused.
Well, then let's go with it. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. No, I think so. And again, this is, Alan Jacobs wrote this book called Reading in a Distracted Age. You know this book? It's a good little book. I'm not good at this either. I have got 4 kids and I'm running this way and that, and you all know what this is like. But Ecclesiastes 6, if I'm hearing you read it right, is an invitation for contemplation. In other words, it's a call to some sort of... Now, not all of us are monkish or reflective. Some of you are different personalities. Some of you are given to contemplation more readily than others. I get that. But there is a call here to reflection. Ecclesiastes is a book that I would say is tyrannical in its requirement of its readers to reflect. You got to go and think. You got to think on this a little bit. Got to chew on this. And I think that's what makes the parable of the rich fool. And that's a great sermon right there. Comparing the rich fool to Ecclesiastes 6. The rich fool is not reflective and contemplative about the true purposes of life. The man with all these children needs to be reflective about the goodness that God has given him in that and to embrace it. Otherwise, he's lost. He's rudderless. So yeah, I think it's great. Anybody else? Okay.